Listening to a podcast is no replacement for real training. While we attempt to provide accurate commentary, we hold no responsibility on how you use the information we provide. Get medical training.
Badass guy's getting ready to deliver it back.
Is he really?
In the blink of an eye, everyday order can be replaced with once-in-a-lifetime chaos. Be prepared. This is the Civilian Medical Podcast.
This is perfect timing. We're down at the shop and pretty sure the UPS guy's getting ready to deliver a package inside here. So just two dudes talking on a camera. No big deal. Hey, this is episode 77.
Yeah. So, and this is probably like 6 or 7 now that we've done, right?
Yeah.
It's been a while. So
yeah,
we're getting there. And now we're in person. We're not talking over a long distance.
Yeah. So Bobby's in town. We're going to do jiu-jitsu tonight. So probably a little bit shorter episode than what we normally do just because we got to get changed clothes and go grapple. And so he's going to have to grapple against a bunch of white belts tonight. So
I think it'll be all right, though.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Appreciate it, man. Thank you, sir. That wasn't too bad. So we're in the shop tonight filming because we want to talk about like summer's here, basically, and what's a first aid kit, kind of building a first aid kit, or what's a pre-made kit that maybe we already have here at Medical Gear Outfitters that if you're looking to be a little more prepared, what would you be thinking about when building a first aid kit?
Yeah. And specifically, we want to talk about something that's kind of timely for both of us, and that's summer camp. It is that time of year, and in fact, that's why I'm here, because we dropped our kids off today, my wife and I, at a summer camp up in North Carolina. There's a lot of them on the way to the camp we were going to. I think I passed 15 other camps. And your kids are getting ready to go to camp as well, too.
Yep. My kids leave this week for camp, so kind of nerve-wracking for parents to kind of send your kids off. Like, I don't know, maybe we're the only parents that feel that way, but definitely a little nervous.
Yeah. This is the first week for my kids to be away at an overnight camp. They've done a lot of soccer camps, day camps, stuff like that. And we've had them stay with family before, but this is the first time they're at a summer camp away. So we got there a little early, and when I was dropping off my youngest son, I saw there was a table for nurses to check in with medication, things like that. So I went over and talked to them, and we talked a pretty good bit about their preparedness. It's a rather large camp with different activities in different locations, and talked about how they work through that, what kind of training they do. And so we'll get into that a little bit later.
Yeah. Sounds good. So thinking about some common emergencies, what's some things we might see at summer camp that we want to think about being prepared for?
Well, if it's my kids, it's probably one of them being a knucklehead and getting hurt. Fortunately, neither of them have, allergic reactions, no bee allergies, things like that. But that could be a really common thing. And I anticipate that if you were providing medical care at a camp, you would probably expect to see allergic reactions, anaphylaxis, poison ivy for sure.
Yeah.
Kids getting out into the woods.
Yes.
And, when I went to summer camp as a kid, we went fishing and canoeing, and we even had a shooting range and bow and arrow. There's probably not a lot of camps with shooting ranges these days, but
yeah, probably
there's definitely
the 90s.
All kinds of opportunities for kids to get in trouble, even a fish hook injury, things like that. So
yeah,
there's a lot of little injuries. And then I think just anytime you put a bunch of teenagers together, you have the potential for all of your DCAP BTLS stuffs, all of your bumps, scrapes, cuts.
Do you see what DCAP BTLS stands for?
Yeah. So do you have it written on the wall in here?
No, I do not, okay. But I remember it.
Deformities, contusions, abrasions, punctures, penetrations, burns, tenderness, laceration, swelling.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, good job.
So mnemonics work.
Yes.
25 years later.
Still remember that.
Still remember it.
Still can spit it off. Yep. So yeah, I think about like broken bones. You're talking about like boys being boys, like boys are doing stupid stuff, kind of egging each other on.
Yes.
So broken bones, fingers, legs, arms, stuff like that's a real possibility.
Yep. And then it is the summer, and we're in the South. So heat exhaustion, dehydration, definitely heat stroke, all of those things.
Our kids don't drink water all the time. They're not drinking energy drinks and stuff like that.
I got water in here, so I'm hydrated.
But how much coffee did you drink before the episode?
I've had some coffee today.
See, there we go. So
it's going to help us run through this a little faster.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. We gotta go.
Just got one now.
Talk fast.
Yeah.
Yeah. So hopefully these, camps have nursing and some kind of medical provision on there, things like that. Just for me, on my standpoint, there's a lot of stuff about riots going on with California and stuff like that. And now they're starting to pop up across the country now. They're trying to get organized riots for June 14th. So I'm not sure when this will publish, when we're doing it. So, but we're filming it before July 14th. So now there's talk about organized riots across the country now.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the cities that my kids will be in is on the list for organized riots. Wow. So I've already texted a friend of mine. I was like, hey, if something happens, I need you to get my kids. Yep. And he was like, absolutely. Sucks for the other kids, but your kids are going to be taken care of. So just kind of making those provisions, just kind of thinking ahead. That way, if something does happen, we have a game plan.
Yes.
And not, and that's a whole different side than not other than medical. But Gage has some health issues, so we have to make sure we send his medications with him and stuff like that, and kind of have a game plan for his health conditions going for there.
Yeah. So one of the things that I noticed when we were dropping the kids off, they have kind of a central area with a lot of buildings, and then all of the different activities are kind of spread out through the woods. Mm-hmm. There's lakes, there's soccer fields, there's climbing walls, things like that. So one of the things I said was, the nurses said, well, we have nurses, mm-hmm. And there's a nurse here 24/7. They have a clinic on site that has bandages, bumps, scrapes. They have your basic emergency mm-hmm. medications. And I said, well, I anticipate that the nurse probably stays here in this central location. What do you do for all of these other locations? And they said that for their camp, which I think is a really good idea, they have outposts at each of these different locations that have like your AED mm-hmm. and your first aid equipment in each of those. And all of the staff have your basic CPR, AED, stop the bleed type things. So no matter, hopefully any of the teenagers, any of the teenagers are prepared to offer first aid. Yeah. I remember as a kid thinking that my counselors were grown people, and now I drop my kid off and I'm looking at these teenagers that are running the show and I'm thinking, oh man,
they're just kids too.
They're kids.
They're just kids.
There's only a few years difference between my kids and their kids.
Yeah. Like I remember looking up to counselors like, oh my gosh, like they're so cool, blah, blah. And I'm like, they were college kids.
Yeah.
They were not adults. They were college kids. So some of the equipment that hopefully is at your camp, just got a thumbs up on the screen. That was kind of weird. I don't know what that was about. don't make the outtake. So we think about, like you said, AED, stop the bleed kits. Mm-hmm. They do have medications, but like for us, like Gage is on a bunch of prescription medications. Right. So we have to send those with him, and they give a list of like, all right, this is when he can take it, when he can't take it, and stuff like that. So
yes. Yeah. And I think it's important to make sure as a parent, you have that all really well documented, written down, and hopefully the camp, if you're running a camp, if you're a camp administrator or you're mm-hmm. a nurse, hopefully you guys have a really good, well-documented process for that. We'll talk a little bit about documentation and processes later on. But there's definitely a lot of kids that have medical issues. Yep. And ideally we'd like them to still be able to go to the camp and have the same opportunity as other kids. So it's important to make sure that you have that availability of staff and resources to manage them.
Definitely. And then stop the bleed kits. You kind of mentioned that. I know probably the cat tourniquet's probably mm-hmm. the tourniquet everyone has. That's going to go down to 5 inches in circumference. So it kind of goes small. But typically if they don't have kids limbs smaller than that, typically just need
like you as a kid. Let's say you as like an 8-year-old.
Oh, I thought you were saying me
you were
now.
Skinny.
I was like, I got this.
Really small arms.
Like a pressure bandage, stuff like that.
Right.
Like my legs, probably like chicken legs. The pressure bandage, some gauze, stuff like that. Probably I wouldn't say necessarily a chest seal. Hopefully we don't need that. But I think enough to stop the major bleeding with a tourniquet, pressure bandage, and some gauze is typically what in a pair of gloves, because probably the counselor's not familiar with the kids and stuff like that. So
sure,
put some gloves in there.
Kids aren't familiar with the counselors as well. So.
Yes, exactly.
That always goes two ways.
Yes, exactly.
Patients used to always say, oh, you don't need to put gloves on for me. I don't have any diseases. And I'd just say, well, you don't know about me.
Yeah, exactly. True.
And that always took care of it. They never complained after that.
I think like the SWAT T is another good option for a tourniquet. It's the big giant rubber band.
Right.
So I like that one as well for kids. But I think probably the cat tourniquet. There's some other tourniquets that are good, but that's probably the most popular one right now. So
right. I will say while I was in town last night, I met up with a friend of mine in Greenville who's a police officer, and he had his cat tourniquet right here on his vest ready to go.
Yeah.
And we talked about that, and I said, good job. Way to have that there. And he said they do a pretty good bit of training with him. So
yeah, we just did training with my sheriff's office, and like we trained them, and part of this, we did a 2-day course, and on the second day, it was a lot of like entry into a house. You exchange gunfire, and now the suspect's down. Mm-hmm. So let's provide aid to the suspect. We know he did try to shoot you, but also is a human being. So let's try to take care of him and try to save his life. So we reinforced that a little bit and things like that, like clearing the house, make sure it was safe, but then providing care, because that's what pretty much the standard now for law enforcement. They do and get involved in officer-involved shooting is they're going to provide care to the suspect now.
Yep. And then, back to our kind of list of things that can go wrong. We talked about dehydration, heat stroke. So got to make sure your kids have water. And also, I think in an ideal situation, you should have a lot of electrolyte options in your kit, particularly if you're here in the South. I grew up in Maine where it doesn't get that hot, but you can still get quite dehydrated in the summer. But down here, it's just a different kind of heat.
I know a lot of people are going to like liquid IV, stuff like that, kind of moving away from Gatorade, Powerade, just because there's so much sugar in those drinks. So if you're just drinking that, like you can get upset stomach, causing vomits and diarrhea, just all as much sugar as you're taking in. So liquid IV and those kind of electrolyte packets work well. If you're going to use Gatorade, Powerade, then just make sure you're swapping that back and forth. So you're like doing a Gatorade and then drinking water, rotating them back and forth. But the electrolytes seem to be like the big thing right now. Everyone's going to like a liquid IV. Like we put those in some of our kits. I believe it's in the hiking kit that we use. We just go and put that couple packs in. That way it gives you some electrolytes, get you back to get help.
Absolutely. Liquid IV, there's another sponsor we can talk to.
We'll send the email.
So let's talk about kits then. So you have the ability here at Medical Gear Outfitters to build a custom kit for somebody. They want specific stuff. So any camp nurse, first responder, counselor could reach out to you and say, here's a list of things I want in a bag, put it together, and you can do that. But you also have, I looked on the website, there's some specific kits that you have that are already preset. They come with a set amount of content, and then people can buy either individual replacements or full refill packs. Yep. So let's talk, we'll start with the biggest stuff that you would want to have if you were a first responder or a nurse at the camp. What bag do you have that you would say, hey, this is a good one for you, and what's in it?
Yeah, so I think like if I were thinking about like a hiking, like a camp counselor or something like that, I would probably look at like our mom kit or our first responder kit. Like that's a bigger kit that's kind of stationary that you could put in like that centralized location we're talking about. Like you put it there. It's a bigger kit. You're not going to carry it, but it's somewhere you could put centralized location. Right. And we call it a mom kit, but that's one of the kit that my wife designed. And it's great for a vehicle, house, things like that. It's kind of big, so you're not going to like carry it in a backpack, but it could be put in a centralized location. I think something like that as well. And then think about smaller kits, like those outposts, like you were talking about. I would put smaller kits out there, like Stop the Bleed.
Anywhere you have like a major activity center, like they're going to play soccer or do some field activities over here, there should be a hut that has which kit is it?
So I think about like a Stop the Bleed kit. We make a Skinny Medic Stop the Bleed kit where you can pick your tourniquet, you can pick what gauze you want, and we'll vacuum seal it. So it's nice and compact. It's also protected from the weather. I think a boo-boo kit is great because it has so much like little small meds in there, like Tylenol, and it's got ointments and burn cream and all that kind of thing in there. And then the hiking kit, it has that moleskin. So if you're out doing activities where you're going to be moving, stuff like that. So it's more of like the hiking kit. It's not for like a through hiker. It's more kind of thinking about like a day hiker. Right. But if you've got a group of kids that are day hiking or you're just all goofing off on the trails, I think that hiking kit is good. Yeah. And then the one that's been super popular for the outdoors people is the IROC kit. And it comes in a Pelican case. So it's nice and sturdy. You can put it on a four-wheeler, ATV, side-by-side, whatever. And if it falls off, gets run over, it's completely fine. So it has a tourniquet, but also has some boo-boo type stuff in there. And it's also got room to add like the boo-boo kit in there. So you want to add some smaller stuff in there, you could do that. But in the Pelican case, keeps it protected. That way, if you are side-by-side, four-wheeler, it's taken care of.
It sounds like we have a side bet to see how many times you can say boo-boo in this podcast, but we don't.
We could do a drinking contest later. That's the bourbon. We'll film another one with shots of bourbon.
Okay. Yeah. And there go any sponsorship opportunities.
Yeah, it's maybe a bourbon sponsor. Let's do it.
All right. So you always say right gear, right training. So that's the right gear. There's a lot of options. And really, I would say just expanding on that, just look at what you have going on. If you do a lot of water sports, think a lot about lifeguards, think about backboards to get them out of the water. Of course, we don't really go into spinal immobilization like we used to.
Yeah, thank gosh.
Still getting people out of the water. It's pretty helpful.
Yeah.
And, look at whatever your organization is. If you're taking your kids to summer camp, stop and talk to the staff there and make sure that they have some preparedness that they've done, that they have the right equipment and the right training. So let's talk about the training. So obviously, hopefully, if it's a large camp, they're going to have a paramedic or a nurse
Mhm.
on staff. They'll
Yep.
have some standing orders, some protocols, and things that they can do. What else would you do other than just having that background?
So I think in making sure that everyone has a basic first aid CPR class. That's like very basic. Usually basic first aid CPR is an 8-hour course. You get that knocked out. It's video based. There are some hands-on training, stuff like that. But I think learning how basic first aid, like how to splint, how to, recognize heat stroke, what's a heart attack, and then how to do CPR, how to do choking, things like that is absolutely 100% got to have that.
Yep. Yeah. As a former employee of the American Heart Association, I would tell you, you can go to heart.org and there's always a link somewhere on the homepage that says find a CPR class or get CPR trained. And there are thousands of places in the U.S. and probably by now at least 1,000 outside of the U.S. for places where you can get AHA, CPR, and first aid training. And Stop the Bleed is also really prolific now.
Yeah, I think
prolific
that's
means it's all over the place.
See, I almost did something bad there. Oh, it's okay. I'll get you in a minute.
He's gonna
In about an
we're gonna
hour.
earn the explicit
In
rating.
about
on
an
this
hour, I'm
podcast.
gonna get you. So I think EpiPen, stuff like that. They talk about that in the American Heart Association first aid class, like how to use an EpiPen, how to recognize an inhaler, like making sure it's their medication is their inhaler, stuff like that. And like you said, Stop the Bleed is another course I would think about. Sometimes you can find those either super cheap or free. Bleedingcontrol.org, I believe, is the website for that. You can find local classes there. Of course, you'd be subscribed to Skinny Medic YouTube channel.
Right.
That's
A
another
lot of good training on there.
have to have requirement for there. And then, a lot of places are offering training. They'll come to you and stuff like that. So getting your staff together, maybe the week or two before training or, your camp starts is important. If you are running a camp, get together, do everybody's training at the same time, kind of builds camaraderie, builds a teamwork as you're working through this class.
And then you can even take that to the next level and do some scenario-based training, some drills. Okay, what if we have somebody who breaks a leg and they're way out here at this far point of the camp?
Yeah.
How do we treat them there, stabilize? How do we get them here to where an ambulance can meet them? Where do you set up a landing zone if you have to call in a helicopter? I mean, I hope that's last case scenario, but you want to know if we have a major trauma, major medical emergency, and we're out way in the middle of nowhere, where can we put a helicopter down? What is the recommendation today for a helicopter landing zone for most helicopters? I think that
it's like 75 by 75 typically is what,
75.
that 50 to 50 or 100 by 100, depending on which agency it is. But yeah, we do it, not a lot, I would say, but we have some camps in my department. But those camps are an hour and a half, 2 hours from a trauma center. So if you have a kid who does have a long fall or has a serious injury, we're going to fly them out.
Yep. And
currently with like the No Surprise Act on billing, like used to, we were always taught like the bills would be super high, $60,000 plus for helicopter rides. And so now with the No Surprise Act that was passed, they can't do that anymore. So we've seen a lot of times the patients get cheaper bills by the helicopter than they were by the ground transport.
Yeah. And for sure, I know where my kids are this week in Western North Carolina, for sure a helicopter would be the fastest way to get them to a trauma center from there, because those roads are crazy and a lot of switchbacks.
Definitely.
So if you're running a camp or any sort of event where you're going to be far from major cities, you should know where your nearest landing zone options are. Parking lots, big fields, and make sure that you're looking at any obstacles that they could be there. If there's an antenna, power lines, things like that. When you call in, communicate that to the dispatcher that's going to be sending the helicopter.
Good. When you sent your kids to camp, did you have to sign anything saying that you give them permission to take care of their kid, or like if he goes to the hospital and you can't be there, like do you have to sign paper like that?
Full transparency, my wife signed everything. I have no idea what we signed.
I don't know.
Probably.
Let's get Sarah on the phone.
Yeah.
Call her real quick. Hey.
Did you read the terms and descriptions?
Yeah. So a lot of times they do have that. They'll get you to sign. But if we as EMS are talking with a kid, we're going to assume that you want us to take care of your kid and make the best call to transport your kid and stuff like that. And same thing in the hospital. If your kid has a broken arm, I would assume you want me to take him to the hospital, give him some pre-hospital pain management, and I assume the hospital is going to take care of that. So we have those abilities with the legal right of EMS to be able to take your kid and transport him.
Yep, absolutely. So kind of going back to the scenarios and drills, I would say just make sure that you're looking at you don't have to, you can't anticipate everything,
Mm-hmm.
but think about what are the high probability events or even the low probability but high risk events
Yeah.
that could take place, and run through some drills. I've done this in the past in different roles. We did it when I was a paramedic here. We did a few water rescue simulations when I was in charge of the medical team for our church in Dallas. We did a lot of training and drilling around different situations that could happen in a large church campus, how we would get people out, where we would put people for evacuation in the event of a mass casualty incident. And so really there's just no substitute for having gone through those motions before and knowing what you would do in those situations.
Yeah, good point.
So we talked a little bit before about making sure that you have policies in place and that you have those communicated out to people. If you have medical staff who are running everything, they need to know everything. And you've got these teenage counselors, they probably need to know a much shorter set of policies and have a lower expectation that they're going to remember everything and have to do everything. But make sure that you have a different set of policies for the people running the show and the people who are going to be out there with the kids at all the time. So they know how to activate that emergency response system wherever they are.
Definitely. So even thinking about like when to call EMS, like when should I just call the parents? Like, hey, little Sammy's got a sore throat.
Right.
Probably doesn't need a 911 response, but if little Sammy fell off the climbing wall 20 feet, that's an automatic 911 call. So when to call EMS, when we can call the parents and things like that.
And I would also think about those kids that do have ongoing medical conditions, chronic medical conditions that are there. If they have a medical emergency, I would call EMS, get the ambulance on the way, and then call the parents so you can get a more detailed set of information to relay to EMS. Because I know as EMS providers, when we go into houses, you'll run into patients that have chronic medical issues. Sometimes there's parents whose kids are bed confined and on a ventilator, and the absolute best source of information for providing care for them is their parents.
Definitely.
They're in it day
the
in,
mom,
day
not
out.
the dad.
Usually.
The mom is
usually the
one.
mom. So if I were, running a camp, I were responsible for kids, I would get the ambulance on the way.
Yep.
And then call the parents and say, hey, here's the situation. Tell me what I need to tell EMS when they get here so that they can provide the best care for your kid.
Yeah. And we actually had a situation kind of similar to that last year here, where we responded to a camp and I would not have taken my child by ambulance for the complaint. And so the staff were like, you got to take her. And I was like, I don't mind taking them, but let's talk to the parents first to see how this is going to go. And so called parents on the phone and said, hey, my name is, introduced myself and told them what the complaint of the child was and said, more than happy to take your child to the hospital, or I can leave your child in care of counselor so-and-so, and you can take them to the hospital to go to urgent care, stuff like that. And the family chose that. And they actually were like, thank you for not taking my child, because they are going to get a bill. And they did not have health care insurance. So they're going to get a nice bill from EMS when this kid didn't need an ambulance. We were just going to give him a ride, which we didn't mind, but he didn't need an ALS paramedic ride.
Right.
The EMT was just going to sit in the back and talk to him on the way to the hospital. So if we can make that decision and kind of work with the parents to make what's best for the child, then we'll actually do that. So
absolutely. So when you're thinking about all of these different layers of medical response, what would you tell people about Good Samaritan laws related to, you have your nurses, paramedics, and then you have all down to your camp counselors that are hopefully CPR certified? Yeah.
So paramedics, nurses, you're going to be held to a higher standard because you have a license or you have a certificate, depending on which state you're in. And they can absolutely come at you for liability, negligence, and things like that. It takes a lot to prove that kind of stuff, but they can try and come after you. As far as the counselors, you're going to be more under that Good Samaritan law. You do have some training. As long as you would provide the patient care that a reasonable person would do, you're good. If you're a camp counselor and you have CPR, basic first aid, and you put a tourniquet on someone who's got a lot of blood coming out, you're covered. Absolutely. If you're a camp counselor and you decide you're going to start an IV on someone because you saw it on the news or you saw it on NBC, you're out. They're going to come after you. But
don't poke holes in anybody's throat because you saw it on the pen.
Yeah, don't use a pen, jab that. So,
no.
But hopefully the camp's going to have some liability insurance too to kind of help everybody covered, things like that. But just go back to what your training was, and if you don't know, then just hold what you have. But again, nurses, paramedics, you're going to have a set of guidelines, standing orders that you're operating under. As long as you stay in those guidelines, you're good. Your medical control will back you 100%. It's the camp counselor who just first aid CPR training, and then so that person would want to just stay there. If you start giving, you have basic first aid and CPR, but you start giving people Tylenol, giving people medicine, then you're operating outside of what your training is, and you could be held.
Yeah.
So just be cautious.
Yep. I think that's most of what we want to talk about, but let's just go through the big highlights. I think making sure you're ready. So right training.
Yep.
Right equipment.
Yep.
And practice the way that you expect an emergency will happen. Right?
Yeah.
To make sure everybody's ready.
I like your idea of running the scenarios because especially we talk about like you're doing this before camp or before everybody shows up, you're going to help build up unity and kind of that teamwork aspect. You're going to have some fun. You're going to laugh. Hopefully you're laughing and having a good time with this, because if it's boring and it's death by PowerPoint, no one learns anything.
Right.
So if you make the scenarios fun, entertaining, then people are learning and they're hitting all these little learning receptors. We can talk about that later. But I think just have fun with the training and scenarios.
Absolutely. And I think it will also take a lot off the mind of parents when they know their kids are being cared for by people who have the training and the equipment they need to take care of an emergency.
Yeah, policies, procedures. If you're running a camp or you're kind of going to a camp, go have a cup of coffee with the EMS director. Like call the EMS director going, hey, I have a camp in your call area. I'd like to have a cup of coffee. And that way you can kind of talk to them and kind of what their expectations are. Like, hey, I don't have an ambulance anywhere close to you. Or, hey, yeah, I typically have an ambulance that's 5 minutes from you. They don't run a lot of calls. They should be available. Or we have a quick response vehicle in that area. But go have a cup of coffee with the EMS director and build that relationship up. That way when you do have an emergency and let's say it goes well, then you're like, hey, Miss So-and-so or Mr. So-and-so EMS director, your crew did a fantastic job. Appreciate them coming out. They were respectful. They were awesome. Or on the other end, you're like, hey, crew came out and they were a jerk to my staff. They were smart enough to my staff, things like that. You already had the relationship built prior to having the emergency.
And you, as an EMS training officer, would love if somebody reached out to you and said, we have a camp in your call area. Can you come by? We're going to do some training this day. And talk about what it would be like to interact with you guys when your crew shows up.
Definitely. And like I said, I would love that because then we could build out a scenario. And I've got plenty of my field training officers that would love to come help too. And we can have some fun. So.
Yeah, do that. And if you work at a camp and you have other ideas that we didn't talk about, feel free to send us some comments. If you have any complaints, send it to Dietrich, and we can highlight some of that stuff next month as well.
Yeah, sounds good. Like I said, if you're looking for equipment, medicalgearoutfitters.com, civilian medical, I believe is the coupon code, and then it takes you 10%. So
awesome. So next month, I'm going taking my kids, and we're going to be off grid for a few days in northern Maine. And away from cell phone reception and all of that stuff. So kind of going back to the telecommunications stuff we talked about, kind of this camp stuff. We'll bring it all together and we'll talk a little bit about if you're doing something off grid this summer, what are you doing to prepare? Yeah,
that'd be awesome. Take some notes and we'll talk and I'll send you my Starlink.
Sounds good. And in the meantime, I'm going to go steal some stuff off the shelves.
Good. Yeah, I'm going to pat him down.
A lot of great gear here.
And subscribe at civmedical.com.
Cool. It's a lot more fun.